in a certain sense, what I found so valuable about going to Turkey and learning more about Hizmet movement was to reinforce what I knew anyway, but to reinforce the idea that Islam is not, these people. It's not people who have bombs and want to kill and shoot. That Islam indeed is so much bigger and so much broader. Of ISIL. My name is Chris Brown. I'm an associate professor of political science at Carleton University here in Ottawa. In the past, I've been the chair of the Department of Political Science. I've been an associate dean in the Faculty of Public Affairs at the university. Currently, I'm heading up a new program that Carleton is going to be creating, a Bachelor of Global and International Studies. So I certainly have international interests. But I should be clear, my actual area of research is Africa, Southern Africa. So I'm very happy to have learned a little bit about Hizmet, about Islam, when we traveled to Turkey last August, but I do not pretend to be an academic expert on Islam or on Turkey. This past August, we had the good fortune to do a trip to Turkey, sponsored by the Intercultural Dialogue Institute, that's what it's called, here in Ottawa. We were there for 10 days with a small group of academics, and it was wonderful. We were very impressed by the kind of overall philosophy of the movement, as I understand it, and I, could certainly be corrected on exactly the details of the philosophy. I've always been interested in sort of questions around history and politics and ideology, of course, as a political scientist. The sort of history of Islam and the roots of current controversies in Islam are something I've read some books about and been interested to know about. Kind of hear something new about Islam and kind of make connections between this contemporary movement, and when we went to Konya and we looked at Rumi's shrine and kind of the deep historical connections between Sufism as it existed and it was founded and the Hizmet movement today. Not the same, but there's a connection for us. That was very interesting to learn about those sorts of things. And maybe it's surprising, but I would put it in the context here in Ottawa, in Canada. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a terrorist attack. Somebody on Parliament Hill who came with a gun and shot a soldier at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and then went into Parliament buildings and was shot and killed. And this person claimed to be a Muslim. He claimed to be doing this in the name of Islam. This is not the first experience of these types of things we've had in the West. Everybody's talking now about homegrown terrorism and so on. And the people who do this call themselves Muslim. And they claim to be furthering the values of the religion. And I think we know this in the West, that such people are not representative of Islam. We know that they are people with problems in their mind who do strange things, and that they represent no one. But nonetheless, they claim that what they are doing is in the name of Islam. And I think that despite the best efforts of everyone, despite the best efforts of the Muslim community here, despite the best efforts of Canadians more generally, there's still a danger that people like that will become the face of Islam and will become what people in Canada know and understand Islam to be, even though they're not. And I think that In a certain sense, Canadians need more Hizmet, right? Because in a certain sense, what I found so valuable about going to Turkey and learning more about Hizmet movement was to reinforce what I knew anyway, but to reinforce the idea that Islam is not, these people. It's not people who have bombs and want to kill and shoot. That Islam indeed is so much bigger and so much broader and so much more diverse and has so many more tendencies and trends within it, most of which are not about bombing and shooting and killing. But to be honest, I'd never heard of Hizmet before, right? But I'd heard of Al-Qaeda, and I'd heard of ISIL, and I'd heard of these types of groups. And I think that it's necessary and important for people in the West to understand that the people who speak for Islam are not these bombers, but they're other people. And I was very, this is part of the dialogue that I didn't know. I didn't know that in Turkey there was debate that included a movement like Hizmet that was putting forward ideas that have, as I understand it, quite deep roots in a kind of tradition of Islam called Sufism, that is nonetheless talking about very modern ideas around democratization, around a market economy, very specific then debate around whether we should join the European Union or not. That there are people who are coming at this from an Islamic perspective that is not a false or a wrong one, but is a deeply rooted one, but that are arguing, well, yes, we should be integrating with the West, we should be promoting market economy, we should be promoting a pluralist democracy, we should be promoting freedom of speech, and these are Islamic values. They're not foreign Western values. To me, people in the West don't know enough of that unfortunately the bombers have gotten too much of the attention. And although we tell ourselves, no, they're not the only voices, we don't actually know the other voices. And so for me, this was quite constructive. With the Hizmet movement, we have a strand of Islam that is not well known in the West, that is drawing on the Sufi tradition, and we really loved our time we spent in Konya and going to the Rumi shrine and kind of seeing with your own eyes, and we went in the evening to a performance of the dervishes. It was great theater as well as everything else. But more importantly, thinking about and talking about his ideas. And those ideas, if I understand them, around dialogue, around a kind of non-judgmental approach to people, around tolerance, around a peaceful resolution of disputes, these are powerful ideas. And these are ideas that, as I understand it, are very central to Islam, but are not emphasized by the people who would throw bombs and would shoot in the name of Islam. I think it's very important to understand that, okay, here's a strand within Islam, which is Islamic. It's not, coming from somewhere else. It's coming from deep within the tradition, but is nonetheless emphasizing these traditions and is trying to think about what they mean in the modern world. But Hizmet doesn't have a single centralized organizational structure. Mr. Gulen and his ideas, but he has refused to become, if you will, the CEO or the president of the company. And so he's propagating his ideas, and it's much more what we call a movement than a civil society organization, in the sense that here's a set of ideas, here's a set of organizing principles, but then it's up to people who are attracted by these ideas in their own sphere of life, in their own area, to then create organizations and so on, following in those ideas, but not tied in any direct way to a central organization. This is quite unusual. It gives it strength in the sense that the movement, I think, is much less susceptible to external attack. There's not one central place that can be attacked. It also maybe makes it a little bit weak in the sense that it's difficult to kind of respond quickly or mobilize around a particular issue at a particular time, because you have all these people everywhere that are pursuing the ideas, but are not necessarily available to respond instantly to a single central command. So we had the good fortune to go and visit Hizmet Movement, the headquarters in Istanbul. And again, very impressive. This is relatively new. What is it, 10, 12 years old, something like that? And I gather that in a very short period of time, it's become the single largest charity in Turkey. Is that correct? It certainly is very big in terms of the fundraising capacity. I was very impressed. There's very few Canadian NGOs in the development sector, including ones that have been around for many years, that are capable of raising so much money. There's still some learning that Hizmet Movement probably has to do as a relatively new organization. And I don't want to sound critical, or I don't want to sound too critical, because I was so impressed by their dedication and by and the work they're doing. There are all sorts of unintended consequences and all sorts of unexpected results of a laudable human instinct, which is to reach out and help people who are in need. Food aid is a good example, and I think Hizmet's deeply involved with food aid. What we've learned is that when there's a crisis, people need food, of course, and you need to give them food. But we've also learned that it's very easy for food aid to become more of a problem than a solution, because food aid very quickly can become a mechanism through which local food production is diminished. Because basically, think how markets work. You have all this food that's for free. Well, a farmer growing it locally cannot compete against something that's provided for free. And so, without intending to, food aid can have the impact of destroying the agricultural sector in the country that it's given to. And there's lots of other things that we've started to learn over the years about how the foreign aid business is actually very complicated and difficult, and good intentions can result in bad outcomes. I have a little bit of a feeling that Hizmet Movement is at the beginning of that cycle, that they're still at this point of very good intentions, very impressive fundraising capability, deep commitment and ideals, but not yet necessarily a deep enough analysis of the relationship between foreign aid and development. And that in fact, ironically, giving people things is not actually the right thing to do, always. So I suspect, because I was very impressed by the organization, I suspect that they will evolve and they'll change over time.
I think that all people are called in their own way to draw close to God, to turn away from things that would separate them from the love of God. And I think the Hizmet movement offers a pathway for people to draw closer to God.
Because certain people either have control or power or money or greed, they're causing much harm to the world, to their own people, and to the faith. And I think that's where this movement, Mr. Gulen's doing, is fundamental to understanding and respect for each other, and we need more of it.